Ever feel like you're just drowning in information? Trying to make sense of a world that just keeps throwing more stuff at you. Well, imagine cutting through all that noise to grasp something really fundamental, a force that's shaping nations, economies, and, frankly, your future. Today, that's exactly what we're doing. Our deep dive is into population dynamics. We're talking about how the sheer size and the shifts within a nation's population aren't just, dry statistics. They're the bedrock drivers.
Yeah, the drivers of its economic power, its social stability, even its standing on the global stage, it's huge. And our guide for this dive is a really comprehensive intelligence report. It pulls back the curtain on how these population trends connect directly to national wealth, poverty, and, well, a nation's long-term viability. What's particularly interesting right now is it then drills down into specific policies from what's being called Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, or OBBA, and it looks at how provisions in that bill could, potentially influence population growth through things like economic incentives and immigration policy.
Right. So our mission for you listening in is to pull out the most important nuggets from this report. We want to help you really grasp this complex dance between people and prosperity and maybe what it means for the future, not just here, but globally. Ready to unpack this?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the report, like you said, it hits hard right away. It frames population size not just as a number, but as this foundational force. So how does it start to break that down? What's the strategic framework it lays out, these main population trends and their impacts?
Well, it lays out a really clear categorization, basically three main scenarios: increasing populations, declining populations, and stable populations. Each one has pretty significant implications.
Okay.
So for increasing populations, the report points out that this typically expands the labor force, right? Which boosts GDP, often drives innovation, makes sense. But, and this is crucial, the report highlights this kind of threshold. If growth is unmanaged, it can actually reverse those benefits pretty quickly.
Unmanaged growth.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, it's not just about straining infrastructure, which is the obvious thing. The report suggests it can lead to unexpected social fragmentation, maybe even drain innovation. So that potential asset can become a liability if it's not handled right.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's increasing. What about the declining scenario?
Yeah, declining populations, the implications here are quite serious, according to the report. We're talking a shrinking tax base, reduced productivity, and critically, an aging population. That increases the welfare burden significantly. Think about it. Fewer working-age people supporting more retirees and kids. The report calls this a rising dependency ratio, and its analysis strongly suggests this leads to a risk of economic stagnation, maybe even a loss of global influence for countries on that track.
Stagnation and loss of influence. That sounds pretty stark.
It can be. And then the third category is stable populations. Now, this allows for long-term planning, helps maintain a kind of equilibrium in society, but its success isn't guaranteed. The report notes it's particularly vulnerable to external shocks, think global economic downturns or unexpected migration patterns. And its success also seems to rely quite a bit on equitable income distribution.
That distinction between managed and unmanaged growth and the fragility of stability, that really adds some layers. And the report uses real-world examples, right? It's
Yeah.
not just theory.
Oh, absolutely. It points to nations like Japan and Italy. They're facing those declining populations, and the report uses them as prime examples. They're grappling with shrinking workforces, those rising dependency ratios, and this directly threatens their long-term economic sustainability.
Right.
Conversely, you have nations with managed population growth. I think India, Nigeria, they're cited as countries that could potentially harness a demographic dividend. That's that big economic boost you can get when a large chunk of your population is in their productive working year.
Right, that dividend concept.
Exactly. But the report emphasizes that dividend only pays off if infrastructure and education systems keep pace. It's all about getting that balance right,
Yeah, balance seems key. It's fascinating how these big demographic forces ripple outwards. So let's connect that to the next part of the report, the deeper dive into specific causal links. How does population size actually translate into things like national wealth, innovation, military strength, or, on the flip side, poverty and welfare burdens?
Right. This is where it gets down to the why. Why does population matter so much? When we look at economic productivity, larger populations generally mean higher aggregate GDP, just more people working and consuming. But the report highlights that youthful populations are particularly key. They tend to drive entrepreneurship, boost consumption, and provide that essential labor supply. It's not just numbers, it's the energy, the dynamism younger groups often bring.
Okay, so youth is a major factor there.
Definitely. Then moving to innovation and military strength. The logic is pretty straightforward, really. More people often means more minds working on new ideas, which can foster strong tech ecosystems. And, well, a larger population gives you a bigger pool for military recruitment, strengthening defense capabilities.
Makes sense.
Conversely, demographic decline can seriously erode a nation's strategic position. Fewer potential engineers, fewer scientists, fewer soldiers. It impacts global competitiveness and deterrence.
And the other side of that coin, poverty and welfare.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
challenges. An aging population, as we touched on, inevitably leads to higher healthcare and pension costs. That can put a huge strain on public budgets. I mean, we all want a comfortable retirement, right? But the report underlines this financial balancing act nations face.
Here.
It also points out something important about youth. While it can be a dividend if you have these large youth bulges without enough jobs, well, that can unfortunately lead to social unrest, more crime, even radicalization.
Wow. So it's not inherently good or bad. It depends on the context, the opportunities available.
Exactly. It shows how interconnected all these factors really are.
It's incredible, the complexity.
Okay.
So with that foundation laid, understanding these dynamics, let's pivot to the policy analysis in the report. Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, OBBA. What specific parts of that bill does the report highlight as potentially shaping these population trends we've been talking about?
Okay, yeah. The report breaks down the relevant OBBA provisions into sort of two main buckets that could impact population. First, there are the economic incentives aimed at family growth.
Okay, like what specifically?
Well, it includes an expanded child tax credit raised from $2,000 to $2,200 per child, and importantly, indexed to inflation. It also introduces this no tax on tips and overtime provision. So workers earning under $150,000 could exclude up to $25K in tips and $12 to $5K in overtime from their taxable income.
And the idea there is,
The report notes the intent seems to be increasing disposable income for working families. The theory being that might encourage more births. There's also senior tax relief mentioned, an extra $6,000 deduction for seniors earning under $75K. That's aimed at reducing some of that intergenerational financial pressure we talked about.
okay, so that's the economic incentive side. What's the second category?
The second category involves immigration and detention policies. This is quite different. OBBA allocates a massive $45 billion to DHS specifically for immigrant detention, and that includes families.
$45 billion. That's a huge number.
It is. There are also stricter asylum and visa fees proposed, specifically a new $100 fee just to apply for asylum, a $5,000 penalty for crossing the border improperly, and generally increased visa costs. And lastly, the bill includes reduced access to benefits for immigrants, cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, ACA subsidies, even for lawfully present immigrants.
So you've got these economic incentives potentially encouraging births, and then these immigration policies potentially discouraging population growth from abroad. How does the report assess the overall impact? It sounds like forces pulling in different directions.
You hit it exactly right. And the report's assessment is careful to present that duality. It doesn't really pick a side, it just lays out the possibilities. On one hand, it suggests those economic incentives, the tax credit, the tip relief, could potentially encourage higher birth rates, particularly among working-class families maybe feeling the financial squeeze.
Makes sense. Potentially more disposable income might make having kids feel more feasible.
That seems to be the logic presented. However, on the other hand, the report clearly points out that the immigration restrictions, the benefit cuts, those could suppress population growth from that really critical foreign-born segment, especially hitting skilled migrants and asylum seekers, potentially. So you've got these two powerful forces creating a really complex, maybe even contradictory effect on the overall U.S. population path.
That's a critical nuance, isn't it? Trying to predict how those two opposing forces might actually play out.
Yeah.
So looking further ahead then, what scenarios does the report outline for the U.S. population trajectory, say between now, 2025, and 2035?
Yeah, it sketches out three pretty distinct scenarios for the U.S., each one driven by different policy choices and demographic trends, and each leading to a very different place. First is scenario one, managed growth. The report labels this one with a green light, sort of the optimistic view. Its drivers are things like broad tax relief, those child incentives actually working, combined with selective immigration reform that still brings in skilled workers. The projected outcome here is a stabilized fertility rate, maybe around replacement level, and a modest healthy population increase. This could lead to that favorable demographic dividend for the U.S. economy.
Okay, managed growth sounds positive. What's next?
Next is scenario two, stagnation, marked with a yellow light, more cautious. Its drivers are characterized by persistent, maybe even tightening, immigration restrictions, a rapidly aging native-born population, and birth rates staying stubbornly low. The outcome here would be pretty much flat growth, maybe even slight dips some years. And that rising dependency ratio really starts to bite fewer workers supporting more non-workers.
Right, the pressure cooker scenario.
Kind of.
Like,
And then finally, there's scenario 3, decline. This gets a red light in the report. This scenario is driven primarily by things like continued cuts to benefits making life harder for families, widespread anti-immigrant policies discouraging even needed immigration, and growing economic inequality. The projected outcome here is actually a shrinking labor force, leading to economic contraction and potentially a geopolitical retreat for the U.S. if this trend really took hold long term.
decline. Wow, those scenarios really lay out the stakes, don't they? From managed growth to potential retreat. So, given these potential futures, what does the report actually recommend? What strategic advice does it offer to try and steer the U.S. towards that more favorable path, the green light scenario?
Well, it offers several key strategic recommendations. It's trying to navigate these complex waters. First, it advises the need to balance immigration enforcement with skilled migration pathways, basically encouraging high-skilled folks who boost innovation and the economy while still maintaining border security, finding that balance.
Okay, balance on immigration. What else?
Second, it strongly recommends expanding family-centric tax relief, not just general tax breaks, but specifically increasing things like child tax credits and maybe housing subsidies to directly support young families and make having and raising kids more financially viable.
Targeting support for families. Makes sense.
Third, it highlights the importance of investing in youth employment and education. This is absolutely critical, the report argues, to prevent those poverty traps we mentioned and to actually maximize any demographic dividend you might have, making sure young people are skilled and productive.
Investing in the next generation. Crucial.
Absolutely. And lastly, a really crucial point from the report is the emphasis on monitoring regional disparities. This means targeting places like rural areas or low-income areas that might be losing population, using specific incentives there to prevent them from, quote, hollowing out.
Hollowing out, like losing their economic base and social fabric.
Exactly, preventing that kind of regional decay.
Okay, so balance immigration, support families, invest in youth, and watch those regional gaps. Seems like a comprehensive approach. So to kind of bring it all home, the core message from this deep dive seems incredibly clear. Population dynamics, they're not just numbers, they're absolutely fundamental to a nation's destiny. And policy choices, like the ones laid out in Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, they have direct and potentially profound impacts on where things go.
That's definitely the takeaway. These aren't small tweaks. They can shape the future trajectory significantly.
We've covered a lot of ground today, really digging into this report.
Yeah.
As you've been listening, what connections or maybe aha moments stood out to you from this deep dive, something that maybe clicked differently?
Yeah, it's a lot to process. And maybe one final thought to leave you with, if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, right? Considering the report's projections and recommendations for the U.S. itself, how might shifts in global demographics outside the U.S., big population booms or busts elsewhere, how might those further influence America's future, given its own unique population path?
That's a great question. How the rest of the world's demographic shifts interact with our own.
Exactly. It's a question that definitely invites a lot more thought, well beyond just this one report.